Champions League time, folks, and of course a couple more weeks that I can enjoy Studio C here at the lush production center that we have here. Cheers to you. But ladies and gentlemen, yeah, it's a couple more weeks until I can still enjoy this, so I might as well take advantage, right? Champions League time rolls around and there's a lot of interesting things to start delving into. Number one, the first semifinal today. It'll be between, of course, PSG and Borussia Dortmund. It's interesting to see how they played out because Dortmund showed certain facets of play that they've always shown, despite their erratic play. Keep in mind, there's something interesting about Dortmund so far in the Bundesliga this year. 60 points, 30 at home, 30 away. So, yeah, okay, fine. It shows consistency. Well, it also shows inconsistency both away and at home. So, it ends up being one of these very important encounters where there's lots at stake. Dortmund have played very well defensively. They've been one of the better defending teams in all of the Champions League. I think they're in the top 5 in terms of balls intercepted. And why do I mention one statistic in general? Because it was very effective, and that statistic in particular ended up being one that was quite the statistic that kind of told the story best, because Dortmund really closed down on PSG. Now there's another one I'll tell you about because it also ends up being true as well. PSG weren't able to break through Dortmund's defense on a consistent basis. Kylian Mbappé was kind of held by Mats Hummels and Nico Schlotterbeck in the middle, and of course Emre Can in the middle as well is Sabitzer. They were able to kind of neutralize him and kind of not make him a factor in that first leg. Part of the reason why PSG had so much trouble creating, not even creating, finishing. Of course, one doesn't really come without the other if you start really thinking about that. So hear me out on this because the most important stat will come later. I'll talk about that. So stay with me on this one. PSG was a team that really needed to find ways to elaborate play, and they couldn't. I mean, when I was on Sportsmax talking about the Champions League, I thought the difference would end up being with Nuno Mendes on the left and also Hakimi on the right. That really never emerged because the way that Dortmund were able to defend ended up being very important. And what ended up being also kind of vital, and I don't think any statistic can really tell you this, is the pressure that wasn't there. The pressure that wasn't there. The pressure that PSG didn't impose on Dortmund in that first leg, that they did implement against Barca in the second leg of the quarterfinals. Because that ended up being the difference, especially when they were down a man, that Barcelona weren't able to really elaborate play. They'd have 1 or 2 touches, they lose it, and PSG would go forward. They'd win the ball again, 1 or 2 touches, they lose it, or sometimes maybe 3, and I'm being generous in terms of what Barcelona were able to do offensively. So that's another thing that many forgot about the analysis of that match. It was easy to break Barcelona's pressure, but then when PSG weren't able to replicate that effort in the middle of the pitch, well, it was very easy for Dortmund to break that pressure, if you want to call it, whatever was being implemented by Luis Enrique's side in the first leg over at the Westfalenstadion. There wasn't the press, so you did see players that were a bit more relaxed on the ball. Dortmund was able to move the ball around a little bit better, because also keep in mind, that's not Dortmund, that's not this incarnation of Dortmund. Dortmund, in terms of what they do now, is totally different than what we're accustomed to seeing them with short passes, quick ball movement, off the ball. No, Dortmund were one of the best teams in Europe. I'm not even talking about Champions League. I'm talking about in Europe, of all the leagues in Europe, of all the big 5 leagues in Europe, that had the lowest percentage of passes and the most long passes sent. So how they break lines ends up being a little bit different than what you're not accustomed to, but what you end up being more involved in terms of what the norm is, or what football kind of is gone towards, or what you're kind of associate breaking defenses or breaking lines is. They end up not breaking lines, they end up skipping lines, sending that ball deep, looking for Nicholas Füllkrug. And that ends up being the case. Keep in mind, the ball that's sent by Schlotterbeck over into the defense, you see a PSG that's trying to press. They're a bit high on their line. Schlotterbeck sends the ball over top, and Füllkrug is able to get to that ball. That's how Dortmund tend to be able to break down defenses. That's where they end up doing things rather well. So, when it all comes down to that, you see Dortmund saying, well, one is enough. One is enough. One is all we need. And that ended up being true in the first leg. But when you face a team like PSG and they don't give, I can't say maximum effort, but they don't give the right effort, the proper effort, they don't give the effort that's necessary, well, then things do end up being a little bit different when it comes to all of this. Things do end up being quite unique. And things end up not favoring PSG in the long run. So that's where we start looking at the problems that this team is going to have to try and revert a scoreline. Is it impossible? No, absolutely not. Playing at home, playing in front of your fans, that's going to be a major factor as well. So, give me a second. Let me take this sip. Great stuff, man. And I'm glad that these guys, I'm glad that I was able to connect with these guys at Commentator because they have some great coffee. So I'll make sure I'll leave a promo code for you, and we'll start working something out in terms of having them here on this channel going towards the future. But it's kind of a professional courtesy, I guess you could say. Now, it's a great product. I strongly believe in it. So, if you want, I'll leave. Actually, I will leave a promo code for you guys to take advantage of. Looking at the PSG side, what do they have to do? Well, the first thing is do what they did against Barcelona in the second leg, which was pressure. Pressure, gain the ball, win the ball in the middle. I mean, there's really, it's not a difficult story to tell. It's not a difficult analysis when it comes to what they need to do, is not do what they did at the Westfalenstadion, which was not pressure as much, kind of be mild. They weren't as intense as they were over at Montjuic week before that, and that ends up being the big difference between a team that ends up blowing the doors off another. You can talk about all the controversy you want in that return leg against Barca, but PSG had a lot to do with that as well. You didn't have as direct to play. You didn't have as many spaces, and with the pressure and with the creation of unforced errors, which is something Dortmund didn't have a lot. Now, when you look at their percentage of passes, and this is what I'm talking about, Dortmund had, like I said, one of the lowest in the Champions League, lowest passing percentages in all of the Champions League. I think they're somewhere in the bottom 10, I should say, or top 10, depending on how you invert that particular statistic. And we say, why are you being so statistics laden, so statistics ridden in this particular case? Well, because as I was, at times you want to see the numerical stats and of course what you see on the pitch, but when you see the game and then you start to see the statistics, there's a few of them, not every single one of them. Don't get me wrong here. There's one or two, and those are the two. I think there's one more that I'll mention, is that they end up really confirming what ended up happening in that match. A lot of the other things really didn't. They didn't tell you the entire truth of what that encounter was. Those two, the percentage of passes and the long passes, well, they tell you two very interesting things about Dortmund. Of course, it's a team that's very vertical, and therefore you as a team, as a defensive team, have to stay honest. If you start closing in, making your lines compact and pushing up the pitch, the risk of someone putting a ball over you ends up being much higher than it is in other cases. And that's exactly what happened if you look at the replay of that goal, as I said before. That's where Dortmund ends up being a very dangerous side, where they end up not luring you, but allowing and saying, okay, fine, they're going to pressure, no problem. We're just going to drop the ball back and send it deep to Nicholas Füllkrug or whoever it may be, Jadon Sancho, whoever is in an area where they can create some damage on the other end, especially when the defenders are having to backtrack that way. and having to turn around, and you already have a player that's very pacey, or a player that can secure the ball in front of them, that can end up being a big difference maker in that particular case. That's where Dortmund can cause damage. That's where PSG also have to control and understand that they can't permit those types of balls to come out, that they also have to be a little bit wiser in terms of how they're going to attack Dortmund, and also find ways to liberate or give some freedom of space to Kylian Mbappé to be able to create what he can do with the ball at his feet. Speaking of Mbappé, 43 goals this year. For Dortmund, you have to look at their top 4 goal scorers for them to have a combined 46. Dortmund also a team that, like I said, has been very erratic. How erratic? Well, I told you one number. Now here's another one. Against the top 4 teams in the Bundesliga this year, they've only won once. That was against Bayern. That was it. So you see how erratic they are. So you don't know which Dortmund you're going to get today. You might end up getting the Dortmund that replicates the effort just a week ago. You might end up getting one that's totally different, and PSG can run rampant against them. It's a possibility. So when you look at it from that perspective, it ends up being a very interesting set of circumstances, because you don't know what you're going to get with Dortmund on a week-by-week basis, a match-by-match basis. But I can tell you that they offer this, what I've said before, against a PSG that you already know, they're already a known commodity. They've been consistent. Although you can also say, well, Juan, but Ligue 1. Yeah, you're right. But this is their measuring stick. And I've always said this, for PSG, Ligue 1 is kind of an afterthought. It's kind of the training ground, the warm-up for the Champions League, because this is what Mbappe's legacy is all about. This is what PSG's legacy is all about. This has been the obsession of PSG since, since the ownership that is now in power has taken over. This is what they wanted to do. This is where they wanted to be. And going forward is where they hope that they can stay for many years. And for them, it would be an ideal way to say goodbye to Mbappé, because we know that he's leaving and a new project has to go underway. And how that project's going to evolve, well, no one knows. So let's keep that in mind when we're really delving into what goes on in terms of what PSG is going towards in the future, which could be very near, or we'd have to wait until after June to find out, because there's a possibility that they get to the Champions League final. It is a true possibility. So for the most part, when you finalize this particular game, when you really break this particular game down, it's a team, it's who's going to be the most consistent, who's the one that's going to be able to play that proverbial 180-minute match, or is it going to be, now that PSG didn't play very well in the first 90, that they're going to have to play one of the best matches of the season? Can they do that? I believe they can. Now, will they do that? That I don't know. But when you analyze everything that's out there, Dortmund, you don't know. Dortmund is, while on the other end, you know that what one team can do. On the other, you know that you don't know what's going to happen with Dortmund, because of their erratic play, because of their inconsistencies, because of everything that we've already mentioned earlier on in this video. So all we can hope is that it's a great match, that it ends up being as exciting, as filled with emotion as the first leg, because it is. If it is, then boy, we're in for a great match. That I hope that's the case. So anyways, guys, I hope that this gives you a little bit more insight. Hopefully that helps you a little bit more, and I hope that you end up watching Champions League and enjoying it. So make sure you're checking it out if you're in the Caribbean. By the way, I'll be on post-game to talk about what goes on in the Champions League semifinals, of course, previewing the one tomorrow between between Real Madrid and Bayern Munich. That'll be at the Santiago Bernabeu. That sure will be a cracker. That will be an amazing one. I'll have a video up for that as well. Make sure you're checking it out, okay? Till next time. Ciao. Oh, and by the way, make sure you do the usuals.